He had ordered countless things in his life, but he never expected one simple request to reveal the truth he was never meant to see. Alexander Bennett was known throughout the city as a man who valued control above everything else. As the head of a powerful organization, he was respected, feared, and rarely questioned. Every decision around him was carefully planned, every detail handled with precision. But on one quiet evening, a message arrived that changed the direction of his night. A woman needed to be brought to him. The request sounded ordinary, almost like another matter that required his attention. Alexander expected a simple explanation, a brief conversation, and a problem that could be solved quickly. He had no reason to believe it would become something he would remember. Across the city, Amara Williams lived a very different reality. To most people around her, she was simply a maid working in a place where her voice was rarely noticed. Many looked past her without understanding who she truly was. They saw her position, but they never saw her strength. They saw her silence, but they never wondered what stories existed behind it. Amara had learned to remain calm even when people underestimated her. She carried herself with quiet dignity and never allowed others to decide her worth. She knew that appearances could be misleading, and she also knew that the truth often remained hidden until the right person finally looked closer. When Alexander finally saw Amara, something about the situation felt different from what he had been told. The details did not match the person standing in front of him. She was not the problem he expected. She was not someone who needed to be judged by rumors or assumptions. Instead, she was someone carrying a story that had never been heard. For the first time in a long time, Alexander found himself questioning the information placed before him. He had built his entire life around making quick decisions, but this moment required something different. It required patience. It required understanding. And most importantly, it required him to look beyond what everyone else believed. Amara noticed the change in his expression, but she remained cautious. She had learned that promises were easy to make and difficult to trust. She did not know why a man with so much power was suddenly paying attention to her situation. She only knew that her life had brought her to a moment where everything could change. Alexander did not yet understand the full story behind Amara's past. He did not know the secrets she had protected or the challenges she had quietly overcome. But one thing was already clear. The woman everyone had ignored was not the person he expected to meet. And as the truth slowly began to unfold, Alexander would discover that the greatest changes in life often begin with the people others fail to notice. The moment Alexander Bennett looked beyond the rumors, he realized there was a story hidden beneath the surface. But understanding the truth would not happen in a single conversation. The woman standing before him had spent years being overlooked, and she was not ready to reveal everything to someone she barely knew. Alexander was used to people approaching him with clear intentions. They wanted favors, opportunities, or approval. But Amara Williams was different. She did not ask for anything. She did not try to impress him. She simply stood there with a quiet confidence that made him curious. For someone who had built his life around reading people, Alexander found her difficult to understand. Amara had learned that staying silent was sometimes safer than explaining herself. In the past, she had discovered that people often judged what they saw before they ever tried to learn the truth. They saw her as a maid and assumed they knew everything about her. They never asked about her dreams, her abilities, or the experiences that shaped the person she had become. Alexander noticed these details because they did not fit the image others had created. He saw someone who remained composed despite being underestimated. He saw someone who carried herself with more strength than many people with far greater status. That realization stayed with him long after their first meeting ended. Meanwhile, Amara wondered why a man like Alexander would take interest in her situation. She understood the difference between kindness and curiosity, and she knew powerful people often had their own reasons for asking questions. She did not want sympathy. She wanted to be seen for who she truly was. Alexander slowly began looking into the information he had received. The more he learned, the more questions appeared. Certain details seemed incomplete. Certain explanations did not make sense. It became clear that someone had only shown him part of the story. For the first time in years, Alexander felt that his usual methods were not enough. This was not a situation that could be solved with a simple decision. It required him to listen and understand. As the days passed, small moments revealed more about Amara's character. She was thoughtful, intelligent, and far more capable than anyone expected. She noticed details others ignored and handled difficult situations with patience. Alexander began to realize that the people around him had made a serious mistake by judging her only by her position. The woman they dismissed was someone with remarkable inner strength. Yet Amara still kept a part of herself hidden. There were reasons she avoided sharing her past, and there were truths she was not ready to reveal. Alexander sensed that there was more beneath the surface, but he also understood that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. And as their paths continued to cross, the powerful man who believed he understood everything began discovering that the greatest secrets were often hidden in the lives of those everyone else ignored. Alexander Bennett had spent his entire life believing that information was the foundation of power. If he knew the facts, he could make the right decision. If he understood the situation, he could find the answer. But after meeting Amara Williams, he began to question whether he had only been seeing the parts of the truth that others wanted him to see. The more Alexander observed, the more he realized that Amara's story was far more complicated than anyone had suggested. She was not someone who needed to be rescued from her circumstances. She was someone who had survived them with patience, intelligence, and remarkable self-control. Amara had spent years learning how to move quietly through a world where people often judged her before knowing her. She understood that some people only noticed a title, a position, or an appearance. They rarely took the time to discover the person behind those things. But Alexander was beginning to do exactly that. He started noticing the small details that others ignored. He noticed how Amara treated people with respect even when she received little in return. He noticed how she remained calm during difficult moments and how she solved problems without seeking attention. These qualities made him curious because they were not what he expected from someone others had dismissed so easily. For Amara, trusting Alexander was not simple. She had learned that powerful people often lived in a world far removed from her own. She did not know whether his interest came from genuine concern or simple curiosity. She had spent enough time being misunderstood to know that appearances could change quickly. However, she also noticed something different about Alexander. Behind his serious expression and controlled personality was someone who was willing to listen. That was something she had not expected. As Alexander continued searching for answers, he discovered more inconsistencies surrounding Amara's situation. The information he had been given was incomplete, and certain details suggested that someone had hidden important parts of the story. He realized that Amara had not simply found herself in a difficult position by chance. There was a deeper reason behind everything. The discovery changed the way Alexander approached the situation. Instead of searching for a quick solution, he wanted to understand the truth completely. He wanted to know what had happened, why Amara had remained silent, and what she had been protecting all this time. Their conversations became moments where both of them slowly revealed pieces of themselves. Alexander began to see that Amara's greatest strength was not her ability to endure challenges. It was her ability to remain kind and thoughtful despite them. Amara began to see that Alexander was not only the powerful figure everyone described. He was also a person capable of questioning himself and changing his perspective. Neither of them knew where this unexpected connection would lead. But one thing was becoming clear. The woman everyone overlooked was slowly becoming the one person Alexander could not ignore. The truth behind Amara Williams' story was slowly coming closer. But Alexander Bennett understood that some answers could not be discovered by simply asking questions. Some people carried their experiences quietly, protecting pieces of their past because they had learned that not everyone deserved to know them. Amara was one of those people. She had spent years building a life around patience, responsibility, and careful choices. She knew how to remain strong without needing recognition, and she knew how to keep moving forward even when others failed to see her value. Alexander had always believed that people revealed themselves through their actions. Now he was beginning to understand that they also revealed themselves through the things they chose not to say. As he continued learning about Amara, he discovered details that changed his entire perspective. The woman others described as insignificant had accomplished more than anyone realized. She had solved problems, supported people around her, and carried responsibilities that were never acknowledged. The more Alexander learned, the harder it became to understand why she had been treated as if she did not matter. Amara noticed that Alexander was different from the people she had known before. He did not simply listen to respond. He listened because he genuinely wanted to understand. That difference made her question whether she could finally share parts of her story that she had kept hidden for so long. Still, trust was not something she could give immediately. It had to be earned through actions, not promises. Alexander respected that. For the first time in years, he found himself slowing down and allowing someone else's perspective to influence him. He was used to making decisions based on limited information and moving forward without hesitation. But with Amara, he realized that rushing toward an answer could mean missing the most important details. Meanwhile, new information began to reveal that Amara's past was connected to events that involved people far more powerful than she appeared to be. The situation was not as simple as anyone had believed. There were hidden choices, forgotten moments, and unanswered questions that needed to be uncovered. Alexander knew that discovering the truth would require patience and careful attention. He also knew that Amara deserved to have her own voice heard instead of having others speak for her. Their connection continued to grow through small moments of understanding. A simple conversation, a shared observation, or a moment of honesty became more meaningful than either of them expected. Alexander began seeing beyond the role Amara had been given. He saw her determination, her intelligence, and the strength she carried every day. Amara, in return, began seeing a side of Alexander that few people ever witnessed. Behind his reputation and authority was someone who was capable of reflection and change. Neither of them realized that these discoveries would soon challenge everything they thought they knew. Because the biggest secret was not only hidden in Amara's past, it was also hidden in the reason their paths had crossed in the first place. The more Alexander Bennett learned about Amara Williams, the more he realized that the story everyone believed was incomplete. For years, people had accepted the version that was easiest to explain. They saw Amara's position and assumed they understood her entire life. But Alexander had started noticing the details that others ignored. He understood that a person's true value was not defined by a title, a job, or the opinions of those around them. It was revealed through character, choices, and the way they treated others when nobody was watching. Amara had always lived by those principles. She never needed recognition to do the right thing, and she never allowed other people's assumptions to decide who she was. As Alexander spent more time around her, he began discovering qualities that challenged everything he thought he knew. She was observant, thoughtful, and remarkably composed. She had a way of understanding situations that others overlooked, and she often noticed solutions before anyone else did. These qualities made Alexander realize that Amara was not someone who needed to be protected from the world. She was someone who had already shown incredible strength while facing it. For Amara, seeing Alexander change was unexpected. She had known powerful people before, but many of them only cared about appearances and results. Alexander was different because he was beginning to ask questions instead of making assumptions. He was willing to admit when he did not understand something, and that was something she respected. Slowly, the distance between them began to disappear. However, both of them knew that trust required honesty. Alexander still had unanswered questions about the circumstances that brought Amara into his life. There were missing pieces that did not fit together, and he wanted to understand why certain truths had been hidden. He was not searching for information simply because he wanted control. He wanted clarity because he believed Amara deserved to have her story known. As he continued looking deeper, Alexander discovered that Amara had been connected to a situation far more complicated than anyone expected. There were people who had underestimated her and failed to recognize what she knew. There were decisions made around her without considering her perspective. The more Alexander uncovered, the more he realized that Amara's silence had not come from weakness. It had come from wisdom. She had understood that timing mattered, and she had chosen carefully when to speak. This realization changed the way Alexander viewed her completely. The woman he first thought was simply part of a situation had become someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered to him. Amara also began to see that Alexander's transformation was genuine. The man known for making decisions without hesitation was learning the importance of listening. He was discovering that strength was not only about having power, it was also about having the courage to change. Neither of them knew what the next discovery would reveal, but they both understood one thing. The truth they were searching for would not only explain Amara's past, it would also change the way they saw each other forever. The truth surrounding Amara Williams was becoming clearer, But Alexander Bennett soon discovered that every answer created another question. The deeper he looked, the more he understood that her story was connected to events far beyond what anyone had originally explained. What appeared to be a simple misunderstanding was actually a situation shaped by hidden decisions, forgotten conversations, and people who had chosen to remain silent. Alexander had spent years building his reputation by recognizing patterns quickly. He believed that every problem had a logical solution if he had enough information. But Amara's situation challenged that belief because the most important details were not written in documents or explained through rumors. They were found in the experiences of the person who had lived through them. Amara noticed that Alexander was no longer searching for answers out of curiosity alone. He was trying to understand the reasons behind everything that had happened. That difference mattered to her. She had spent a long time feeling like people were interested in what she could provide, but rarely interested in who she truly was. Alexander was beginning to change that. He asked questions because he wanted to listen, not because he wanted to control the conversation. As their trust slowly developed, Amara revealed small pieces of her past. She explained that many situations in her life had taught her the importance of patience. She had learned that speaking at the wrong moment could create more problems, while waiting for the right opportunity could reveal the truth more clearly. Alexander admired that kind of discipline because it was something he rarely saw. Many people around him acted quickly because they wanted immediate results, but Amara understood the value of timing. During their conversations, Alexander also began reflecting on his own choices. He realized that having power had made him comfortable with making decisions for others without always understanding their perspective. Amara reminded him that every person had a story, and every story deserved to be heard before judgment was made. This lesson affected him more than he expected. Meanwhile, new information started to reveal that someone had intentionally kept important details away from Alexander. The situation was not just about Amara's past. It was about why certain people wanted her voice to remain unnoticed. The discovery changed the direction of his search. He was no longer trying to solve a problem. He was trying to correct an unfair assumption that had followed Amara for too long. Amara saw the difference in him. The man who once seemed distant and impossible to understand was becoming someone who valued compassion as much as authority. She did not need promises or dramatic gestures. She only needed honesty and respect. Alexander realized that protecting someone's dignity could be just as important as protecting their future. As the final pieces of the mystery began to come together, both of them understood that the truth would soon challenge everything they had believed. The hidden story behind Amara's journey was about to be revealed, and the discovery would change not only their understanding of the past, but also the way they viewed each other. The final pieces of Amara Williams' story were beginning to come together, but Alexander Bennett quickly learned that the truth was more complicated than he expected. The information he discovered did not simply explain what had happened in the past. It revealed how easily people could be misunderstood when others only saw a small part of their lives. For years, Amara had been defined by assumptions made by people who never took the time to understand her. Now Alexander was beginning to see the person behind those assumptions. As he reviewed everything he had learned, Alexander realized that the greatest mistake was not a lack of information. It was the decision to believe a story before hearing the other side. That realization stayed with him because it challenged the way he had always approached situations. He was known for making quick judgments and finding solutions, but Amara showed him the importance of patience and perspective. Amara noticed that Alexander was no longer acting like someone trying to manage a situation. He was acting like someone trying to understand another person. That change meant more to her than he realized. She had spent so much time being overlooked that genuine interest felt unfamiliar. She did not need someone to speak for her. She needed someone willing to listen. As they continued searching for answers, they uncovered details that showed Amara had been carrying responsibilities far greater than anyone knew. She had made difficult choices, protected important information, and continued moving forward without expecting recognition. Alexander admired the strength behind those decisions because he understood how difficult it could be to remain composed under pressure. The discovery also forced Alexander to look at his own world differently. He began questioning how many other people had been judged without being truly understood. He realized that influence was not only about making decisions. It was also about using that influence responsibly. For someone who had always measured success through results, this was a completely new perspective. Meanwhile, Amara began opening up more because she saw that Alexander's actions matched his words. He did not demand trust from her. He allowed it to develop naturally through consistency and respect. That was something she valued because she knew trust could not be created through promises alone. As the hidden truth became clearer, another important realization emerged. Amara was never the person others claimed she was. She was someone with intelligence, courage, and a quiet determination that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Alexander understood that the greatest injustice was not what had happened to her. It was that so many people had failed to see her value. The discovery changed the relationship between them. They were no longer simply two people connected by a mysterious situation. They were two individuals who had changed because of what they learned from each other. But as the last unanswered questions remained, Alexander knew one final truth had yet to be revealed. The story behind Amara's silence was almost complete, and the answer would show why she had protected her secret for so long. The final secret behind Amara Williams' past was closer than Alexander Bennett realized, and when the truth began to surface, it changed the way he viewed everything that had happened before. For so long, Amara had carried her story quietly because she understood that not every person would believe her, and not every person would care enough to listen. She had learned to protect her peace by staying patient and choosing her moments carefully. But now, for the first time in years, she felt that someone was finally trying to understand instead of simply making assumptions. Alexander discovered that Amara's silence had never been a sign of weakness. It was a reflection of her strength and her ability to remain calm when others expected her to give up. She had faced difficult circumstances without allowing them to define her identity. The more Alexander learned, the more he admired the way she continued moving forward while carrying responsibilities that few people knew about. He realized that the qualities he respected most were the same qualities that others had ignored. Amara was thoughtful, determined, and capable of seeing solutions where others only saw problems. As the truth became clearer, Alexander also began to understand his own transformation. Before meeting Amara, he believed that being powerful meant having all the answers. He believed that control came from making decisions quickly and never showing uncertainty. But Amara had shown him a different kind of strength. She showed him that listening could be just as important as leading, and understanding could be more valuable than simply being right. Amara noticed that Alexander was no longer the distant person she first encountered. He was becoming someone who cared about fairness and honesty. He was no longer focused only on solving the situation. He was focused on making sure her voice was finally heard. That difference meant everything to her, because she had spent so much time being treated as if her perspective did not matter. Together, they began uncovering the final details that explained why so much information had been hidden. They discovered that many of the assumptions surrounding Amara came from people who never bothered to see the complete picture. The truth was not complicated because Amara had done something wrong. It was complicated because others had chosen to misunderstand her. Alexander realized that the greatest lesson from the entire experience was simple. A person's value could never be measured by the way others described them. It had to be discovered through their actions, their choices, and their character. As Amara finally began to release the weight of her hidden past, she understood that she no longer had to carry everything alone. Alexander understood that meeting her had changed him in ways he never expected. The powerful man who once believed he knew everything had learned that the most important truths were often found by listening to the people everyone else ignored. But even with the mystery nearly solved, one final moment remained. The truth they had uncovered would not only explain the past, it would decide what kind of future they would create together. The final truth had finally come to light, and Alexander Bennett understood that the greatest discovery was not about the information he had uncovered. It was about the person standing in front of him and the lessons he had learned along the way. For years, Alexander had believed that strength came from control, certainty, and the ability to handle every challenge alone. But Amara Williams had shown him that true strength could also come from patience, honesty, and the courage to understand someone before judging them. Amara had spent a long time carrying a story that few people knew. She had been overlooked, misunderstood, and defined by assumptions that never reflected who she truly was. Yet through every challenge, she continued to show kindness, intelligence, and determination. The truth revealed that she was never someone who needed to be valued by others. She already knew her own worth. She only needed the opportunity for others to finally see it. Alexander realized that the biggest mistake people made was believing they understood someone after only seeing a small part of their life. Amara's journey reminded him that every person had experiences, dreams, and struggles that were invisible from the outside. The woman everyone ignored had become the person who changed the way he viewed the world. As they moved forward, Alexander no longer saw Amara through the role she had been given by others. He saw her as an equal, someone whose thoughts mattered and whose perspective deserved respect. Their connection was no longer built on a misunderstanding or a situation they needed to resolve. It was built on trust, honesty, and the understanding they had developed together. Amara also saw a different side of Alexander. The man who once appeared impossible to reach had shown that growth was possible when someone was willing to listen and learn. He had not changed because someone forced him to. He changed because he discovered something more valuable than power. He discovered purpose. The experience reminded both of them that unexpected meetings could create the biggest transformations. A person who seemed insignificant could become the most important influence in someone's life. A moment that appeared ordinary could become the beginning of a completely different future. Alexander and Amara both carried lessons from everything they had experienced. Alexander learned that leadership was not only about making decisions. It was about understanding people. Amara learned that she did not always have to carry every burden by herself. Sometimes, allowing someone to stand beside you was also a form of strength. Their story was not defined by what others believed about them. It was defined by the truth they discovered together. In the end, the greatest change was not found in the secrets they uncovered or the answers they received. It was found in the way two people learned to see beyond appearances and recognize the value that had been there all along.